London, 1808. The city glittered beneath a veil of mist and candlelight, its grand facades masking the quiet cruelties that governed its heart. In those gilded halls where reputation was worth more than truth, Lady Eleanor Whitmore was once a name spoken with admiration, a young woman of grace, wit, and kindness, the beloved daughter of Viscount Whitmore, and the promised bride of the Marquis of Ashbourne. Yet in the span of a single evening, all that she had been, and all she had been promised, began to unravel. The ball at Grosvenor Square was meant to mark her final appearance before her wedding. The chandeliers shimmered above her, the orchestra swelled with the elegance of the waltz, and Eleanor's laughter, a sound so gentle it barely rose above the strings, drew admiring glances from every corner. Her gown of pale ivory shimmered like moonlight, and her future seemed as bright. Yet in one shadowed alcove stood Lady Cressida Vale, whose envy was a thing of legend, and whose heart could not bear to see Eleanor loved without effort. One whisper, one perfectly timed suggestion, spoken into the ear of a gossip-starved duchess, was all it took. By midnight, the air in the ballroom had changed. Conversations hushed when Eleanor passed. Fans fluttered with sudden urgency, and the once admiring glances turned sharp. She sensed it first in the way her dance partner's hand stiffened at her waist, then in the pitying smile of a matron who turned away before curtsying. When she found Alexander across the room, she thought for a moment he would come to her aid, but his expression faltered, his mother's gloved hand resting firm upon his arm. That single touch sealed her fate more surely than any spoken accusation. Before dawn, the scandal was printed in ink. Lady Eleanor Whitmore, seen alone in the gardens with a married man, an officer no less. It was a lie, but the kind London adored. Her father, burdened by debts and too weak to fight public opinion, withdrew from every social engagement. The invitations ceased. Her friends vanished as if ashamed of their own loyalty. Within a week, Eleanor stood at the threshold of her family home, a carriage waiting to take her away. Alexander arrived only to deliver the smallest of letters. His apology written in an elegant, trembling hand. "I cannot defy them," he wrote. "My duty is to my name. Forgive me if you can." She read it once, folded it without tears, and placed it in the fire. Then, dressed in a plain traveling cloak, she stepped into the rain. Behind her, the great house darkened as though it had chosen to forget she ever lived there. Years passed. The London that had devoured her name continued to feast on others, and Eleanor, now calling herself Ellen Ward, built a quiet life by the Cornish sea. The world of satin and scandal became a distant echo replaced by the hush of waves and gull cries. She tended to her ailing mother, kept a small garden of lilies, flowers her father once said represented purity, and earned a meager living by painting the cliffs that surrounded their cottage. Her hands, once accustomed to embroidery silks, grew rough from sea air and work, yet there was a serenity to it, a peace born from survival. At times she would sit on the rocky headland and look toward the horizon, wondering if Alexander had forgotten her completely. The rumors that reached Cornwall were carried by travelers and old newspapers, that he had gone to war, that he had returned a hero, that he was now Duke of Ashbourne following his father's death. Of his heart, she knew nothing. She tried to be content with that. Some nights, though, when the wind howled against the shutters, she would wake from dreams of a ballroom filled with violins and the shadow of a man who never spoke. In the 7th year of her exile, her mother passed quietly, leaving behind only a silver locket and the echo of her final words, "Eleanor, you must forgive the world before it forgives you." A week later, while Eleanor prepared to sell what few possessions remained, a knock sounded at the door. A royal courier, soaked from travel, stood upon the threshold. His gloved hand extended an envelope sealed with crimson wax bearing the royal crest. The message within was brief but life-altering. Asterisk by order of His Majesty, the late Viscount Whitmore is pardoned of all prior accusations. The Whitmore title and estate are restored to his rightful heir. Asterisk. For a long moment, she could only stare at the parchment. The ink blurred as tears welled, though she was uncertain whether they were of joy or dread. To return to London meant to step once more into the very world that had destroyed her. Yet she knew she had little choice. The estate, neglected and nearly sold, required her presence. The name that had once shamed her now demanded her to bear it again. That evening, she lit a single candle and stood before the small, warped mirror that hung in her cottage. The woman who gazed back was not the same girl who had once danced beneath chandeliers. Her features were finer, quieter, marked by time and salt air, yet her eyes still held that steadfast light that neither scandal nor sorrow had dimmed. She traced the reflection of her face and whispered, almost as a vow, "I have survived shame. I can survive their gaze." When dawn broke, the carriage awaited her once more, much like it had on that night of exile. Yet this time, she stepped inside not as a fallen lady, but as a woman tempered by silence and self-respect. The road wound away from the sea, carrying her toward London's endless mist. The journey northward unfolded like a memory she could not escape, each milestone a reminder of the years stolen. As the landscape changed from rugged coast to manicured fields, her heartbeat grew steady, her resolve sharper. She no longer dreamed of forgiveness from society. She desired only the right to stand unbowed before it. On the third evening, as her carriage reached the outskirts of London, she glimpsed the faint glow of the city through the fog, an empire of light, opulent and unfeeling. Somewhere within that maze of stone and gossip lived the man who had once sworn to love her, the man who had let her fall alone. She wondered if he would recognize her now, if he would see the same innocence he once vowed to protect, or only the silence she had learned to wear like armor. As the carriage wheels echoed through the narrow streets of Mayfair, Eleanor lifted the curtain to watch the familiar facades glide past. Her name had returned to the registry of the ton, but not yet to their lips. That, she knew, would take courage, and perhaps something greater. When the carriage halted before a modest townhouse prepared for her by distant relatives, the footman offered his hand to help her alight. She hesitated only a moment, feeling the London air settle heavy upon her. Somewhere beyond those lamplit squares, music drifted faintly from a ballroom. She thought she heard the hum of violins, the murmur of silk against marble floors. 7 years had passed since she last danced, yet her heart moved to that forgotten rhythm. The silence she had carried was about to end, though she could not yet know that among the watching eyes of London, one would look upon her not with judgment, but remembrance. She straightened her spine, drew her cloak close, and stepped into the city that had once devoured her. The night swallowed her carriage's sound, but her return was already a whisper on the lips of those who thrived on whispers. Lady Eleanor Whitmore had come home. The ballroom of Lady Pembroke's estate glittered with the full spectacle of London's new season. Candlelight shimmered upon silk and jewels, the air alive with laughter and violins, yet beneath that brilliance pulsed the soft poison of curiosity. When Lady Eleanor Whitmore entered, conversation faltered as though the room itself drew breath. The orchestra stumbled before recovering its rhythm, and fans fluttered to disguise astonished faces. Every eye turned toward her. The woman thought long vanished, the name whispered in parlors for years with pity and fascination. She had chosen her gown carefully, a deep sapphire silk that caught the light like ocean water, neither humble nor vain. The diamonds at her throat were modest, her mother's last gift. Her posture, graceful, unwavering, spoke of composure learned through pain. Yet inside her heart thudded with the raw memory of her fall. She moved as one might through a dream half-remembered, aware that at any moment it could twist into nightmare. From the corner of her vision, she caught Lady Cressida Vale watching, her smile poised, her eyes cold. The woman who had orchestrated her ruin looked untouched by time, radiant, beloved, her place in society unchallenged. She glided forward with a practiced air of sympathy. "Lady Whitmore," she said, drawing the attention of those nearby, "how extraordinary to see you again. We had heard you had taken ill in the country." Her tone carried sweetness sharpened by malice. Eleanor inclined her head slightly, voice soft but steady. "Indeed, though I find London's air no easier to breathe." A few gentlemen chuckled quietly, others turned their faces, unsure whether to admire her courage or scorn her defiance. The night stretched endlessly. Partners came to claim her hand, some out of curiosity, others to prove they dared. She danced, smiled when required, and ignored the subtle whispers. Each step felt like reclaiming an inch of ground once lost. Yet her thoughts drifted to the one man she had both dreaded and longed to see. Alexander, Duke of Ashbourne. She told herself he would not come. He had no reason to. And still, as the orchestra began another waltz, she felt the air shift, as though memory itself entered the room. He stood across the marble floor, tall and solemn, the light catching the insignia upon his chest. 7 years had carved strength into his frame and gravity into his eyes. His dark hair, once unruly, was now neatly bound, though a streak of silver traced his temple, a mark of the wars he had survived. He was speaking with a group of ministers, yet his gaze found her through the crowd, unflinching and unreadable. For a heartbeat, the noise of the room receded. They were 2 figures bound by silence, each measuring the distance that years had made unbearable. When at last he crossed the room, conversation gave way to anticipation. The Duke of Ashbourne was not a man to make gestures lightly, and all of London watched to see if he would acknowledge the woman whose name had once cost him his reputation. He stopped before her, bowed with formal precision, and extended his hand. "Lady Whitmore," he said, his voice deep-tempered, carrying the echo of command. "Would you honor me with this dance?" Her answer came before she could think. "I would." The murmurs swelled as he led her onto the floor. The music began, slow and haunting, a waltz they had once claimed as their own. She felt his hand at her waist, steady and sure, his breath close enough to stir the curl by her ear. For a long while, neither spoke. Then softly, as if afraid the world might overhear, he said, "They told me you fled out of guilt. I see now you fled out of pride." Her eyes met his, their expression calm though her heart trembled. "And you? Did you stay out of duty or regret?" He hesitated, the weight of his unspoken apology hanging between them. "I waited for you," he whispered finally. The words, simple and devastating, seemed to still the entire room. She drew a careful breath, unsure whether to weep or laugh. "You waited," she said quietly, "but not enough to stop them." He looked away, and she felt again the sharpness of what had been lost. When the dance ended, he bowed, yet lingered a moment longer than etiquette allowed. "We should speak," he murmured. "Not here." She inclined her head, her answer measured. "Perhaps another evening, Your Grace." Then she turned and left him standing amid the glow of chandeliers, a man haunted by what he had once surrendered. The next morning brought a letter, its seal marked with the crest of Ashbourne. Inside, pressed between folded parchment, lay a single white lily, withered slightly but fragrant still. Beneath it, in his hand, 3 words, "I have not forgotten." She traced the petals with trembling fingers, the scent unlocking memories she had long buried. The gardens at Whitmore Manor, his laughter, the secret vow they made before her downfall, to never let falsehood destroy what truth had begun. But London's mercy was fickle. By week's end, another letter began to circulate, this one forged in her name, addressed to a foreign officer who had recently attended Lady Pembroke's ball. Its tone was intimate, its content damning. The gossip spread like wildfire. By nightfall, she was again the subject of every cruel whisper. "Some women never change," someone said loudly as she entered a soirée. Others pretended not to see her at all. She endured it with a calm she did not feel. Yet inside, the old ache returned, threatening to consume her resolve. That evening, at a gathering in the Duke's sister's home, she stepped into the conservatory seeking air. The rain had begun to fall outside, and the scent of roses mingled with the storm. When she turned, Alexander was there, his expression dark with fury and sorrow. "I know what they've done," he said quietly. "Someone forged that letter to destroy you again." She gave a bitter laugh. "Does it matter? London only believes what feeds its appetite. If I defend myself, I am vain. If I am silent, I am guilty. What would you have me be?" He stepped closer, his voice breaking its restraint. "Mine. And I would take the blame gladly." For a moment, the world shrank to the space between them, the soft fall of rain, the trembling of her breath, the warmth of his hand reaching for hers. But before their touch could meet, the door opened. Lady Cressida stood framed in the lamplight, her gaze sharp with triumph. "How touching," she drawled. "I see old habits die hard." Eleanor withdrew her hand as though burned. Without a word, she turned and left, her skirts brushing the marble floor like whispers of retreat. Outside, her carriage waited, its lanterns glowing weakly in the rain. She climbed inside, her face pale against the darkness. The horses started forward, and the sound of wheels upon wet stone filled the silence. Behind her, The lights of the conservatory faded into mist. She pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the wild rhythm beneath, and wondered if this was the price of returning, to be reminded, once again, that London forgave nothing. As the carriage turned into the fog, the narrator might have said, history has a cruel talent for repeating itself until someone dares to rewrite it. And though Eleanor did not yet know it, her story was far from finished. The next dawn would demand of her a courage greater than silence, one that could turn shame into grace and longing into defiance. The call came in just after dawn, slicing through the quiet rhythm of the morning like a blade. Marcus had barely finished his first cup of coffee when his phone buzzed across the kitchen counter. He answered with a groggy, "Detective Hayes," but the voice on the other end wasn't routine. It was Chief Lewis, his tone clipped and urgent. "Marcus, you need to get down to Harbor Street. Now." The line went dead before Marcus could respond. He grabbed his jacket, the stale scent of rain still clinging to it, and stepped into the cool morning air, feeling that old familiar tension coil in his chest. When he arrived, the street was already a hive of flashing lights and uniformed chaos. Patrol cars lined the curb, their red and blue strobes reflecting off puddles left by last night's storm. A small crowd had gathered behind the yellow tape, whispering and craning their necks to see. Marcus ducked under the tape and caught sight of Officer Reynolds, his partner of 5 years, standing rigidly beside a covered body. "Who is it?" Marcus asked, his voice steady, though his gut already twisted with a premonition he couldn't shake. Reynolds looked at him, jaw tight. "It's the Whitmore girl," he said quietly. For a moment, Marcus couldn't breathe. Emily Whitmore, 17. Missing for 2 weeks. Her face had haunted every station bulletin board and every late-night conversation in the precinct. Now she was here, motionless under a soaked white sheet. Marcus knelt beside her, lifting the corner just enough to see her face. Her skin was pale, lips faintly blue, eyes closed as if she were only sleeping. There was no visible trauma except a faint bruise at her temple. But the stillness, the absolute finality of it, hit him harder than any bullet ever could. Reynolds cleared his throat softly. "Medical examiners on the way. But there's something else." He nodded toward the alleyway, where an evidence tech held up a small, water-damaged envelope sealed in a plastic bag. Marcus took it and turned it over. The paper was rough, smeared by rain, but there was no mistaking the handwriting. Neat, deliberate, unmistakably familiar. It was the same looping script that had appeared on the other notes left at prior scenes. The same handwriting that haunted the last year of Marcus's career. The press had given the writer a name, the Scribe. Marcus's jaw tightened. "He's back." The words came out low, like a confession. The Scribe had vanished nearly 10 months ago after a string of meticulously planned murders, each victim tied to a message that read like a riddle. Marcus had been the lead detective on that case, and its unsolved end had nearly cost him his badge, and his sanity. Seeing that handwriting again felt like reopening a wound that had never healed. By noon, the investigation site was sealed off. The coroner confirmed Emily had likely died just hours before being found. No signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, nothing that screamed violence except the eerie precision of it all. "She was placed here," Marcus muttered, scanning the area. "Deliberate. The Scribe wants us to find her." He crouched down, studying the faint imprint of tire tracks near the curb, the kind that might belong to a van or delivery truck. Every detail mattered. Every omission was intentional. Back at headquarters, Marcus spread the case files across his desk. Photos of Emily joined the others. 6 victims, all young, all seemingly unconnected, until you looked deeper. Each had something to hide, something they thought no one knew. And somehow, the Scribe had known. "Secrets," Marcus whispered, tracing his finger over the words of the first note ever found. "Truth is a blade. Those who hide it bleed the slowest." Reynolds leaned against the desk. "You think he's punishing them for lying?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Or for pretending to be something they're not. He writes like someone who sees himself as a moral judge." He paused, eyes narrowing. "But this time, it feels personal." As dusk settled outside the precinct, Chief Lewis entered, her presence commanding but worn with worry. "Hayes," she said, We can't let this turn into another media storm. The mayor's already breathing down my neck. I want results, fast. Marcus met her gaze. Then give me full autonomy on this. No red tape, no politics. Just me, Reynolds, and the truth. She studied him for a moment, then gave a reluctant nod. You've got 48 hours before I pull you off. The night stretched long and silent. Marcus stayed at his desk, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The old case notes whispered back at him, mocking in their unanswered questions. He opened the latest envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the words written with surgical precision. Asterisk, she lied to the one who needed her truth most. Now, silence will keep her company. Asterisk, Marcus read it twice, every letter heavy with intent. He turned the paper over and froze. On the back, faintly imprinted from the ink, was a name, his name. The room seemed to tilt for a moment, and Reynolds' voice broke through the haze. Marcus, you okay? But Marcus barely heard him. His mind was spiraling through old memories, the phone calls, the sleepless nights, the letters that stopped coming without explanation. He's watching us, Marcus murmured. No, he's watching me. Reynolds frowned. You think this is about you? Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the evidence board, the lines connecting victims, dates, and phrases. Something about the patterns felt different this time. Closer, more intimate. Every prior victim had been chosen for a reason that tied to deceit. But now, with his name surfacing, it was as if the scribe was peeling back a curtain Marcus didn't even know existed. By midnight, exhaustion settled in, but Marcus couldn't leave. He replayed every interview from the first case, every overlooked clue. Then, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated before answering. Hayes. A distorted voice responded, calm and deliberate. You're chasing ghosts again, Marcus. Haven't you learned? Some truths aren't meant to be found. Marcus's blood ran cold. Who is this? But the line clicked dead, leaving only the echo of static. Reynolds rushed over. What was that? Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he lowered the phone. It was him, he said. He's not just back. He's playing with me. The silence that followed was heavy with realization. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, a storm gathering strength. Marcus looked out the window, his reflection fractured in the glass. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Fear. But beneath it, buried deep, was something else. Determination. If the scribe wanted a game, he'd get one. But this time, Marcus wouldn't just play by the rules, he'd rewrite them. And as lightning split the night sky, he whispered to himself, You made a mistake coming back.